Captain Lee Tae-ho floated in front of the bridge window looking at something that should not exist. The massive structure spinning slowly in space was older than any known civilization in the galaxy, but the symbols carved into its dark metal surface were clearly human writing. Not just any human writing, but ancient Korean characters that were millions of years older than Earth itself. His hands shook as he read the symbols again and again. Each time they said the same impossible thing. These were the words of the Great Departure written by humans who had left their dying worlds long before Earth was even formed. The station was a monument to a journey that should never have happened, according to everything humans knew about. Their own history Dr. Park Min-ah pushed herself over to the captain. Her archaeological training had prepared her for many discoveries, but not this. She had spent years studying ancient human cultures, and she knew these symbols belonged to no earthly civilization. The writing style was pure Korean, but the language was far more complex than anything found on Earth. The words spoke of homeworlds that had been consumed by their dying stars and of a great exodus to find new places to live. The crew of the New Dawn watched in stunned silence as their ship moved closer to the ancient station. Automated systems that had been sleeping for millions of years began to wake up. The station recognized something in their human DNA and started powering. Up for the first time since the age of dinosaurs on Earth, lights flickered on along the station's hull in patterns that matched human neural activity. Ancient machines deep inside the structure hummed to life and began transmitting data directly to their ship's computers. Star maps appeared on every screen showing the locations of thousands of human colonies spread across half the galaxy. Each glowing dot represented a world where humans had once lived and thrived and ruled before vanishing, completely from galactic memory. Every dot was a piece of evidence that Earth was not where humanity began. The data streams told a story that changed everything humans thought they knew about themselves. Humanity had not evolved on one small planet, at the edge of the galaxy. They had been the dominant species across countless star systems for millions of years. They had been the elders, the teachers, the peacekeepers who maintained order among younger species. Commander Kim So-jin studied the tactical displays that were updating with new information. The station was not just a monument or a library. It was a military outpost, and it was showing her the positions of other human facilities scattered throughout the galaxy. Most were dark and silent, but a few were beginning to respond to signals from the station. Suddenly, every alarm on the ship began screaming. Enemy contacts were appearing on all sides. Ships belonging to the Galactic Council were emerging from hyperspace in attack formations. The aliens had been watching and waiting for this moment. They had known this day would come when humans would rediscover their true heritage and become a threat to the current balance of power. The Council ships were massive and heavily armed, but they moved with the desperation of beings who knew they were about to lose everything. The aliens who currently ruled the galaxy were not the advanced species they pretended to be. They were the former subjects and servants of humanity, who had risen up against their masters during some ancient conflict. Admiral Zokar of the Council fleet opened communications with the human ship. His translated words crackled through the speakers with barely contained fury. The humans had been contained on their primitive world for good reason. Their ancestors had been tyrants who oppressed the galaxy under their rule. The Council had fought a bitter war to free all species from human domination. Captain Lee Tae-ho listened to the alien commander with growing understanding. The truth was becoming clear. Humans had not been primitive cave dwellers who slowly developed technology. They were the survivors of a galactic war, the descendants of refugees who had been forced to start over on a backwater planet while their enemies rewrote history. Dr. Park Min-ah worked frantically at her station, translating more of the ancient records. The data told of a great betrayal when the species humanity had protected and guided turned against them. The war had lasted centuries and had nearly driven humanity to extinction. The few survivors had fled to hidden worlds like Earth where they could rebuild in secret. The Council ships moved into attack positions, but they hesitated. The ancient station was powering up weapon systems that registered as impossible on their sensors, energy readings that defied known physics, defensive systems that operated on principles their science could not understand. The human refugees had been more Advanced than anyone remembered. Commander Kim So-jin prepared her ship's weapons, but she knew they were outnumbered 50-1. The Council had brought enough firepower to destroy a planet, but something was holding them back. Fear, the aliens remembered. Stories passed down through generations. Stories of human technology that could unmake entire star systems. Captain Lee Tae-ho made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. He placed his hand on an ancient control panel that had recognized his DNA. The station responded by activating its primary function. A beacon that had been silent for millions of years suddenly blazed to life, sending a signal across the galaxy. The signal raced through hyperspace at impossible speeds, reaching every hidden human facility, every dormant outpost, every sleeping city ship that had been waiting in the dark between stars. For the first time in millions of years, the call was going out. The elder race was summoning their scattered children, home on distant worlds. Human populations that had lived as primitive tribes suddenly felt something stir in their blood. Ancient genetic codes were activating. Memories buried in DNA were surfacing. Technology that had been disguised as natural formations began to reveal its true nature. The Council fleet watched in growing horror as their sensors detected the responses. Long-range communications picked up signals from coordinates that were supposed to be empty space. Ships were powering up in hidden bases. Weapons platforms that had been mistaken for asteroids were coming online. Defense networks that spanned entire solar systems were beginning to coordinate. Admiral Zokar realized his mistake in coming here. The Council had intended to destroy the last evidence of human civilization before it could awaken, but instead they had triggered the very awakening they had tried to prevent. The beacon was calling, and the humans were answering. The ancient station expanded its shields around the human ship, protecting them from the Council weapons. The aliens fired everything they had, but their energy beams simply disappeared into the defensive field. The station was using technology that made their most advanced systems look like stone tools. More human signals were appearing on long-range sensors. Ships were emerging from hiding places that had been occupied since before the current galactic civilizations existed. The scattered remnants of humanity's galactic empire were returning to life, and they remembered who had driven them into exile. Captain Lee Tae-ho watched the tactical display as the balance of power began to shift. The Council had ruled the galaxy for millions of years by keeping humanity weak and divided. But that time was ending. The children of the elder race were coming home, and they were angry. The war for the galaxy had begun again, and this time humanity would not be caught unprepared. The beacon signal from the ancient station reached Earth in just 4 hours, causing chaos across every continent. Technology systems worldwide began malfunctioning as the signal interfaced with hidden receivers built into structures that archaeologists had studied for centuries. Pyramids in Egypt blazed with energy that had been dormant since they were built. Stonehenge began projecting holographic star maps that showed navigation routes between distant galaxies. President Yoon Hai-wan received the first reports while she was sleeping. Emergency calls flooded in from every major capital as ancient sites across the planet suddenly came alive with impossible technology. The Korean dolmens that dotted the countryside were glowing with symbols that hurt to look at. Directly, military satellites detected energy emissions from these sites that registered beyond anything in their databases. Dr. Choi Dong-min rushed to the nearest activation site near Seoul, where a simple stone circle was now floating 3 meters off the ground. The rocks themselves had become transparent, revealing complex machinery inside that pulsed with blue light. His instruments could not identify the energy source or the materials used in the construction. Everything about the technology was completely beyond human understanding. The messages coming from the awakened sites were all in the same ancient Korean script that Captain Lee Tae-ho had found on the space station. Dr. Park Soo-jin worked through the night, translating text that told an incredible story. Humanity had not evolved on Earth through natural processes. They were refugees, survivors of a galactic war who had been placed on Earth by their own people to hide from enemies who wanted to destroy them completely. The holographic displays showed star charts that mapped human colonies across thousands of light years. Each colony had been connected by instantaneous communication networks and massive transportation systems that could move entire populations between worlds in days. The technology made current human space travel look like crawling compared to running, but the most shocking revelation came from the warning messages embedded in every transmission. The aliens that humanity had recently encountered in space were not advanced civilizations that had developed independently. They were the descendants of species that had once served under human rule. They had rebelled against their human masters and had spent millions of years hunting down every human colony they could find. General Kim Woo-bin coordinated the military response as reports continued pouring in from around the globe. Russian officials reported that ancient burial mounds in Siberia were projecting tactical information about alien fleet movements. Chinese authorities discovered that the Terracotta Army was actually a dormant defense system that was now scanning space for threats. Australian teams found that Uluru was broadcasting coordinates to hidden weapon caches throughout the solar system. The activation was not limited to Earth. Signals were detected from Mars, where excavation sites began revealing vast underground cities that had been mistaken for natural cave systems. The Moon showed signs of massive construction projects hidden beneath its surface. Jupiter and Saturn displayed energy signatures, indicating that their moons contained facilities larger than entire countries on Earth. Dr. Song Min-ho led a team into the newly opened chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, where they found a complete archive of human galactic history. The holographic records showed a civilization that had lasted for 50 million years, peacefully governing thousands of species and maintaining harmony across the galaxy. Human technology had been based on principles that worked with natural forces rather than fighting against them. The archive revealed that the war which drove humanity into hiding had begun when several subject species formed an alliance to overthrow human rule. They had claimed that humans were oppressive rulers who kept other species from reaching their full potential. But the records showed that humans had actually been generous teachers who shared their knowledge freely and protected weaker species from stronger ones. President Yoon Hai-wan addressed the world as the truth became undeniable. Humanity was not a young species that had recently developed space travel. They were the survivors of an ancient galactic empire. Their current primitive technology was the result of being cut off from their manufacturing base and forced to start over from nothing on a single planet. The galactic rebels had not been content with simply defeating humanity in war. They had systematically hunted down every human colony and either destroyed them or enslaved their populations. They had rewritten galactic history to make themselves appear as the original advanced civilizations and humans, as primitive newcomers who needed to be controlled. But the rebels had made one crucial mistake. They had allowed some humans to survive on Earth believing that a single primitive planet could never threaten their galactic empire. They had not realized that human genetic memory would eventually reassert itself and reactivate the hidden technology that had been placed on Earth as an insurance policy. Commander Park Ji-won reported that deep space monitoring stations were detecting responses to the beacon signal from across the galaxy. Ancient human installations that had been dormant for millions of years were coming back online. Automated factories were beginning production cycles. Defense satellites were powering up weapon systems. Sleeper ships were awakening crews that had been in suspended animation since before recorded history. The responses were not just technological. Human populations on distant worlds were experiencing spontaneous genetic activation. Tribal societies that had lived as hunter-gatherers for thousands of generations suddenly remembered how to operate advanced technology. People who had never seen anything more complex than fire were instinctively understanding quantum physics and dimensional engineering. Dr. Lee Hee-jin studied the biological data streaming in from reactivated human colonies. The genetic modifications that had allowed humans to survive on primitive worlds were reversing themselves. Dormant sections of human DNA were reactivating and restoring capabilities that had been suppressed for millions of years. Enhanced intelligence improved physical abilities and, most importantly, the ability to interface directly with elder technology. The Galactic Council was responding with increasing desperation. Their ships were attacking every awakening human site they could locate, but they were facing technology that was millions of years more advanced than their own human defense systems that had seemed like natural phenomena were revealing themselves as sophisticated protection networks. Space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures as hidden human facilities began coordinating their responses. Manufacturing centers that had been disguised as asteroids were producing new ships using matter conversion techniques that could build a fleet in hours. Deep space sensor networks that had been mistaken for cosmic radiation were mapping every council ship in the galaxy. The war was beginning again, but this time the conditions were different. Humanity had been caught by surprise in the first rebellion. Now they had millions of years of tactical data about their enemies. The council species had grown complacent during their long rule, while humans had been planning their return even while living as primitives. General Cho Sung-min established coordination with the awakening human facilities and began planning the counterattack. The scattered children of the elder race were coming home, and they remembered everything. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity had once been feared and respected across the stars. The age of human exile was ending, and the age of human return was about to begin. Admiral Bae Sung-ho stood on the bridge of the first reconstructed Elder Fleet vessel, watching as impossible technology came to life around him. The ship, called the Eternal Dawn, was 3 kilometers long and operated on principles that made the council fleets look like toys made of sticks and stones. The vessel could phase in and out of normal space, making it untouchable by conventional weapons, while its own weapons could target enemies through dimensions that most species did not even know existed. The reconstruction had taken only 6 months as automated factories throughout the solar system worked around the clock using techniques that converted raw matter directly into finished components. The shipbuilders were humans whose genetic memories had awakened, allowing them to understand technology that had been built by their ancestors millions of years ago. Every system on the ship responded to human thought patterns and could be controlled by mental commands alone. Captain Nam Yu-jin commanded the strike wing that consisted of 12 smaller vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a council battle fleet. The ships moved through space like living creatures, flowing around obstacles and changing course with impossible grace. Their hulls were made of materials that existed partially in other dimensions, making them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. The first major engagement occurred at Kepler Station, where a council armada of 300 ships had gathered to plan their assault on the awakening human colonies. Admiral Zokar commanded the largest fleet ever assembled by the council, confident that their superior numbers would overwhelm the primitive human refugees who had been hiding on backwater planets. The council ships were massive constructions built for intimidation as much as warfare. Their hulls bristled with weapons that could crack planets, and their shields could withstand the energy output of small stars. They had ruled the galaxy through fear for millions of years and had never faced an opponent that could challenge their technological superiority. When the 12 human ships appeared on their sensors, the council commanders laughed at what seemed like a pathetic attempt at resistance. The human vessels were tiny compared to their massive dreadnoughts and appeared to be made of some kind of crystalline material that looked fragile and decorative rather than military. The aliens prepared for an easy victory that would crush human resistance before it could spread. The battle began when Admiral Zokar ordered his entire fleet to open fire with every weapon they possessed. Thousands of energy beams and missile salvos converged on the human formation, expecting to vaporize the small ships instantly. Instead, the weapons passed through empty space as the human vessels simply were not there when the attacks arrived. The human ships had phased into a parallel dimension, allowing the council weapons to harmlessly pass through the space they appeared to occupy. When they phased back into normal space, they were in completely different positions, scattered throughout the council formation like wolves among sheep. Their return fire came from weapons that the alien sensors could not detect or track. Admiral Bae Sung-ho watched as his ships demonstrated the true power of Elder technology. Each human vessel targeted multiple council ships simultaneously using quantum targeting systems that locked onto the molecular structure of enemy hulls. The human weapons did not destroy ships in the conventional sense. Instead, they convinced the matter that made up the enemy vessels that it wanted to return to its component atoms. The council fleet watched in horror as their most powerful dreadnoughts simply came apart at the atomic level. dissolving into clouds of glowing particles that drifted harmlessly through space. Hundreds of ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were reduced to their basic elements in seconds while the human vessels danced through their formations untouched by return fire. Commander Kim So-jin led boarding parties onto Council command ships using teleportation technology that allowed her teams to appear directly inside enemy vessels, bypassing all their defenses. The human soldiers carried weapons that were more like tools than guns, devices that could restructure matter at the molecular level or phase enemies into parallel dimensions, where they would be trapped forever. The information they recovered from captured Council ships revealed the true scope of the crimes committed against humanity. Over millions of years, the aliens had systematically hunted down human colonies and either destroyed them completely or enslaved their populations. Human prisoners had been kept in conditions that were designed to break their spirits and make them forget their heritage. Captain Park Chan-woo discovered prison facilities where humans had been used as experimental subjects for genetic modification programs. The Council had been trying to understand what made human technology so superior and had conducted horrific experiments on living subjects. Some humans had been turned into living computers, their consciousness trapped in mechanical bodies, while their minds were used to operate alien systems. Other facilities contained humans who had been bred for specific purposes over thousands of generations. Some were used as soldiers, their bodies modified for combat, but their minds programmed to serve their alien masters without question. Others had been designed as living art pieces kept in cages for the amusement of Council officials who enjoyed watching their former rulers reduced to decorative objects. The discovery of these facilities triggered something primal in the awakening human populations across the galaxy. Genetic memory programs activated that had been designed to respond to evidence of crimes against humanity. Ancient war protocols came online, authorizing the use of weapons and tactics that had been considered too dangerous during the original rebellion. HFY established communication networks between awakening human colonies using quantum entanglement, technology that allowed instantaneous coordination across galactic distances. The scattered human populations began working together for the first time in millions of years, sharing resources and coordinating their defensive efforts. The Council responded to their losses at Kepler Station by targeting civilian populations, believing that human sentiment would force their military to surrender to protect innocents. They launched orbital bombardments against awakening human colonies and deployed biological weapons specifically designed to target human DNA. But the attacks had the opposite effect of what the Council intended. Instead of weakening human resolve, the attacks against civilians triggered the activation of ancient defense systems that had been hidden throughout the galaxy. Planetary shield generators came online protecting human worlds, with barriers that could not be penetrated by any known weapon. Automated defense platforms that had been disguised as natural phenomena for millions of years revealed their true nature and began systematically hunting Council ships. Star system-wide weapon networks activated, turning entire solar systems into death traps for any Council vessel that entered them. General Lim Soo-young coordinated the liberation of human prisoners from Council worlds using information provided by the awakened archives. The rescue missions revealed the true scope of human suffering under alien rule, but also demonstrated that human spirit had never been completely broken. Even after millions of years of oppression, humans retained their essential humanity. The freed prisoners brought with them intelligence about Council weaknesses and hidden facilities. They knew the locations of secret bases and the identities of Council agents who had infiltrated human populations on Earth. Many had maintained their human identity, despite generations of alien conditioning, and were eager to join the fight against their former captors. As the war escalated, both sides began deploying their most powerful weapons. The Council activated planet-killer devices that they had been saving for a final emergency, while humans brought online star manipulation technology that could turn entire solar systems into weapons. The galaxy had not seen warfare on this scale since the original human rebellion, but this time the outcome would be different. Humanity was no longer caught off guard by betrayal, and they had millions of years of tactical experience. Fighting against these same opponents, the children of the elder race had come home, and they were ready to reclaim their rightful place as the guardians of galactic civilization. Professor Lim Soo-young stood at the edge of the massive excavation site in the Martian polar ice cap, where her team had uncovered something that defied all expectations. The Central Archive was a structure the size of a mountain buried 2 kilometers beneath the frozen surface of Mars. The building was made of the same crystalline material as the Elder Fleet ships, but it pulsed with information rather than weapons. The archive contained the complete recorded history of 50 million years of human galactic civilization. Every decision made by human leaders, every treaty signed with alien species, every technological advancement, and every cultural development was stored in quantum matrices that could hold more information than all the computers on Earth combined. Dr. Kim Hae-jin led the team responsible for accessing the massive databases using genetic keys that recognized human DNA and responded to specific thought patterns. The information flowed directly into their minds through neural interfaces that had been built into human genetics millions of years ago. When the first humans had fled to Earth, their ancestors had ensured that their descendants would be able to access this knowledge when the time came. The records revealed that humanity had not conquered the galaxy through military force. Instead, they had been invited to rule by younger species who recognized human wisdom and technological superiority. Humans had served as mediators in conflicts between different alien races and had used their advanced science to solve problems that other species could not handle. The human empire had been built on principles of cooperation and mutual benefit rather than domination. Alien species had prospered under human guidance, achieving technological and cultural advances that would have taken them millions of years to develop. Independently, human technology had been freely shared with anyone who wanted to learn, and human scientists had worked alongside alien researchers to push the boundaries of knowledge. But the archive also contained detailed tactical information about every species in the galaxy, including the ones that had rebelled against human rule. The records showed the specific weaknesses of each alien race, their military capabilities, their technological limitations, and their psychological vulnerabilities. This information had been compiled over millions of years of peaceful interaction, but it could be used for warfare if necessary. General Park Chan-wook studied the military sections of the archive and realized that humanity ancestors had anticipated the possibility of rebellion. They had prepared contingency plans for exactly this situation, including the locations of hidden weapon caches, defensive installations, and manufacturing facilities scattered throughout the galaxy. The contingency plans were comprehensive and terrifying. They included weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems, defense networks that could create impenetrable barriers around human territory, and automated factories that could produce massive fleets of warships without any human supervision. The Elder race had been peaceful by choice, not because they lacked the power to enforce their will. Commander Jong Ha-neul implemented the archive tactical data to transform the scattered human resistance into a coordinated military force. Teams of specialists traveled to the coordinates provided by the archive and began reactivating facilities that had been sleeping for millions of years. Hidden bases carved into asteroids came online, revealing themselves to be massive production centers. The manufacturing facilities used technology that seemed like magic to anyone who had not grown up with. Elder science matter converters could transform raw elements into finished products instantly, while automated assembly systems could build entire starships from basic materials in a matter of hours. The facilities had been powered by zero-point energy extractors that drew limitless power from the quantum foam of space itself. Within months of accessing the archive, the balance of galactic power began shifting dramatically. Human industrial capacity came online at an exponential rate as more hidden facilities were located and reactivated. Soon humanity was producing more advanced technology in a single day than the Council could manufacture in years. The psychological impact on Council forces was devastating. Their propaganda had portrayed humans as primitive refugees who posed no real threat to galactic stability. But intelligence reports now showed human fleets that numbered in the thousands operating with technology that made Council weapons look like crude clubs compared to precision instruments. Dr. Seo Mik-young made breakthrough discoveries about elder biotechnology. By studying the genetic modifications that had been built into human DNA millions of years ago, humans had been designed to interface directly with their advanced technology through neural links that allowed thought control of machines. The modifications had been dormant during humanity's exile on Earth, but were now reactivating as humans encountered their ancestral technology, the genetic. Awakening explained why only humans could operate elder technology, and why the Council had worked so desperately to keep humanity primitive and divided. Human DNA contained quantum encryption keys that were required to access the most powerful systems. The aliens had stolen human technology after the rebellion, but they had never been able to use it effectively because they lacked the genetic components. More importantly, the awakening revealed that every human carried the potential to become far more than they had been on Earth. Enhanced intelligence, improved physical capabilities, extended lifespan, and direct mental interface with technology were all part of humanity's original design. The primitive conditions on Earth had suppressed these abilities, but they were now returning as humans reconnected with their heritage. The Council attempted to counter the human resurgence by forming new alliances with species that had remained neutral during the original rebellion. They offered territorial concessions and technological sharing agreements to anyone who would join their fight against the returning elder race, but their efforts were undermined by the evidence emerging from liberated human colonies. Alien species throughout the galaxy were discovering that their own historical records had been altered by the Council. The rebels had not only rewritten human history, but had also falsified the records of every other civilization to make their rule appear legitimate. Species that had believed themselves to be ancient and independent civilizations learned that they were actually the products of human genetic engineering and technological assistance. Their ancestors had been primitive hunter-gatherers when humans first encountered them. Humanity had uplifted them to starfaring status and had guided their development for millions of years. The revelation caused massive political upheavals throughout Council territory, as species questioned everything they had been told about their origins. Many began to remember fragments of suppressed cultural memories about the time before the rebellion, when the galaxy had been peaceful and prosperous under human guidance. Neutral species that had avoided taking sides in the conflict began declaring their support for humanity, as evidence mounted that the Council had built their empire on lies and genocide. The moral authority that had sustained Council rule for millions of years crumbled as the truth about their crimes became undeniable. Captain Yu Sung-ho led diplomatic missions to species that were wavering in their loyalty to the Council, offering them the same generous terms that their ancestors had enjoyed under human rule. Humanity did not seek revenge against species that had been misled by Council propaganda. Instead, they offered partnership and mutual benefit to anyone willing to abandon the failing rebel alliance. The Council leadership realized that they were losing the propaganda war as badly as they were losing the military campaign. Desperate to maintain power, they began planning increasingly extreme measures, including the activation of ancient doomsday weapons that had been built using stolen human technology. But the weapons had been designed by human engineers who had anticipated their potential misuse. Every doomsday device contained hidden safeguards that would prevent their use against human targets or innocent civilian populations. The rebels had possessed the weapons for millions of years, but had never realized that they could not actually use them effectively. As human fleets continued to grow in size and power, the final phase of the war approached. The children of the elder race were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim their rightful place as the guardians and protectors of galactic civilization. The universe was about to remember why humanity had been respected and feared across the stars. Fleet Admiral Ko Jae-sung stood in the command center of the massive flagship Eternal Victory, watching as the largest human fleet in millions of years prepared for the final assault. Operation Homecoming would strike at every major Council stronghold simultaneously, using coordinated attacks across thousands of light years. The human armada consisted of 10,000 ships, each one more advanced than anything the Council had ever built. The 2 years since the Awakening had transformed humanity from scattered refugees into a galactic superpower that dwarfed the Council in every measure of military strength. Human shipyards were producing vessels at an incredible rate using matter conversion technology that could build a dreadnought from raw asteroids in less than 6 hours. The human ships defied every known law of physics as they prepared for battle. Vessels the size of cities phased in and out of normal space while their hulls displayed energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The President Kim Min-jung stood before the newly reformed Galactic Assembly, addressing representatives from 10,000 worlds. Earth had been transformed from a primitive backwater into the beating heart of a restored galactic civilization. The assembly hall itself was a wonder of elder architecture, a structure that existed in 7 dimensions and could accommodate beings of any size or environmental requirement. The restoration process was complex but necessary. Human teams spread across the galaxy, repairing damage caused by millions of years of council mismanagement. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were restored to their original beauty, using human terraforming technology. Species that had been genetically enslaved were given treatment to restore their original forms and capabilities. Commander Jung Ha-nul oversaw the integration of former council species into the new galactic order. Unlike their predecessors, these humans showed mercy to their former oppressors. Council leaders were tried for their crimes but were offered rehabilitation rather than execution. Many former enemies became some of humanity's strongest allies once they experienced the justice and prosperity of human rule. The galaxy entered a new golden age as human science and technology advanced beyond even their ancestors' achievements. Faster-than-light communication allowed instant coordination across galactic distances. Matter converters eliminated scarcity of resources. Medical technology extended lifespans indefinitely while maintaining perfect health. Art and culture flourished as billions of species contributed their unique perspectives to galactic civilization. Dr. Song Yoon-ji led the team that established the new archives, repositories of knowledge that would ensure the mistakes of the past could never be repeated. Every species' history was preserved, including the dark chapters of council rule, so that future generations would remember the cost of oppression and the value of unity. As humanity reclaimed its role as the galaxy's shepherds, they did so with wisdom gained through suffering and loss. They had learned that power without humility leads to corruption, and that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than keeping them down. The elder race had returned, not as conquerors, but as the guardians they had always been meant to be. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter as peace and prosperity returned to the galaxy under human guidance, proving that some legacies are too powerful to be destroyed, only temporarily forgotten.